it's just wonderful, wonderful stories. So here he is, Shawn Anthony from Fogo Island and Scarborough. Good morning, Shawn.
Good morning, Carolyn.
Let's try this again.
It's not my fault. If it is, I apologize profusely.
No, I don't know what happened. It could have been. So anyway, we are recording now, and we'll just go straight into this interview. So we, just for the listening audience, we connected and then lost the call. Um, so, Shawn, just so you know, I'm sitting here now and I'm looking at my window. I'm in Lewisport and it's just starting to snow. But the rest of the province is in the middle of a huge snowstorm. It's coming our way, so it's just moving in here now. So what might have happened could have been internet related because I'm on Skype
I see.
phone.
I see.
And
Okay.
so we are going to cross our fingers that the storm doesn't impact us. But if it does, well, we'll just carry on another time. But so that you know, if I disappear, I am Mother Nature's in charge to a big degree today.
I appreciate the heads up, and it's hard to blame Mother Nature. She brings so many good things to us. So, you got to take the bad with the good, I guess, right?
Well, right, and usually it all works out. But I know she's coming. So we've got the storm chips in, and the kids are home from school, and so we know she's coming. We're ready for her. Wood stove's going. Like we're okay,
nice.
But we may lose
Beautiful.
the internet. So
okay, good to know.
So anyway, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I haven't certainly read your book yet, but you have written a memoir of sorts. Which has an interesting title. Piqued my interest right away. And so that you know, I was at a meeting with Scott Sims. Well, I was actually calling in because there was another storm, and the meeting was in Gander. And we were chatting about things, and I just have a book coming out in a month after the meeting was over, and we were on the phone. It was just and Scott says, "By the way, you should read this book." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" And so we started talking about it, and that led me to immediately contact you so we could talk about it to everybody else. So tell us a little bit about. Well, first of all, you're originally from Fogo Island?
I am. I was born on Fogo Island. We lived there I lived there for a few years. My parents, both sides of my parents are from there. My dad is Brian Anthony from Seldom, and my mom is Rowena Burns from Island Harbor. And we moved to Toronto when I was a kid, to Scarborough, Ontario. And we went back every summer. But my teenage years, I would go back from pretty much the last day of school until Labor Day and live with my nan and pop, and spent a lot of time with uncles and aunts and cousins, and gallivanting around and everything else. So I tell people when they say, "Wow, you're from Fogo Island, Newfoundland, and you grew up in Scarborough, Ontario," and I say, I had the two extremes. I had the extreme urban experience, and I had the extreme rural experience. So that's in part what my book is about too, is that contrast, and how sometimes you think these two different places that are physically and geographically so different. Quite often, it's the people that define the place, and the experiences really. You kind of look around and say, "Wow, maybe people from the two very different places aren't that different after all."
It's interesting because I grew up on Change Islands, and we had we had people like you who would come down from Toronto and spend the summer on the island. So of course we would get to know them over the summer, and then they'd vanish. And in fact, two of my cousins married fellas whose families were originally from Change Islands, who were, regular summer boys, we used to call them sometimes.
Nice.
And they would come down and spend the summers. And of course, they are the best ambassadors for the place because, they had the best of it, right? They had the comparison. And so do you find that you are, a huge ambassador of both, I guess, because you've experienced both and had that upbringing.
Yeah, well, I do tell people if they're if they're moving around and looking for work quite often, and they're in Ontario or they're in Calgary, I do make a point of saying every Canadian should try to live in Toronto for a year, and get that objective opinion about the place actually there, because we all have perceptions of Toronto. Everybody in Canada has a perception of Toronto. Rarely, if you haven't lived there or haven't experienced it, or even if you have experienced it, there's often a lot of negative about it. And meanwhile, you go there and you kind of realize maybe it's not all what it was cracked up to be, positive or negative. That being said, in the conversation of, and I don't want to make this political discussion by any means, in the 90s and in the 80s, actually, and even now, there's still a conversation about distinct society and Quebec being a distinct society. I spent my summers on Fogo Island. I would come back to Toronto and I'd say, do you want to talk about a distinct society? I'm going to tell you about a distinct society. I could tell you about this island off of the coast of Newfoundland that had these 10 different communities, and sometimes those 10 communities seemed as distinct from one another as though it was two completely different provinces, let alone different communities. So I do, out of every opportunity, when I have somebody who says, hey, I'm looking to go for a vacation, I'm looking for somewhere different, I am quick to tell them about Fogo Island. Two funny things have happened, Carolyn, in the last couple of years. Number one, when I tell people, and usually that's the first thing I tell people when they say, hey, tell me a bit about yourself. I say, well, I'm originally from Fogo Island, Newfoundland, and I grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. And they used to always say, where is what is Fogo Island, Newfoundland? Where in the name of God is that? Like, I have no idea where you're talking about. But now, in the last 4 years, that is replaced with intrigue. That's right. Oh, you're from Fogo Island.
Yeah.
And it takes me back, A, that they know where I'm talking about. Not that the place doesn't deserve it, because it sure does. But B, that it comes with this reputation almost as Canada's Martha's Vineyard. It comes with this, oh, you're from Fogo Island. Tell me about, what's Fogo Island like? What do you think of it? And I only have rave things to tell them, and I tell them the exact same thing I tell them about Toronto. I could talk about it until I'm blue in the face. You need to go there to experience it. You need to go and meet the people. You need to see the places and see this harmony that exists between the two. There's no place in the world like it. And, there's plenty of people, a line up a mile long, of people who will say, oh, there's lots of places like that. And you will not talk me out of that. I've been to a lot of places in the world, and I'm going to tell you, there's no place in the world like Fogo Island, and Change Islands for that matter. The two almost have the same, I would almost say the same kind of chip on their shoulder, in a way, in a positive way, in that, yeah, that's right. We're out here, we're by ourselves, we're isolated, and we're doing all right. We're doing okay. Thank you very much. There's not an attitude to it in a negative way, but if anything, there's definitely a confidence about it. People who've never been on the island go, how do you guys do it in this winter months? How do you, this isolated island in the middle of the Atlantic, how do you do it? And they go, well, we do it just fine. If we wanted to be somewhere else, we'd be somewhere else. That's how we do it. And a shrug of the shoulders that go along with that. And then, hey, why don't you come in for a cup of tea? And that's how it goes, right? So,
right.
I can't say enough to people about going to Fogo Island. The other funny thing that I found has happened in the past couple of years is friends of mine have a friend who's planning on going. And then they'll phone me up and say, hey, Shawn, my friend's going. Could you talk to them before they go? And I'll say, oh, all right. And so I'll talk to them, and I'll say, hey, you know what? You got your reservation made. I'm going to phone up somebody at the inn who I know, not that this makes a difference, but I'll phone them up and say, hey, if they're getting a tour, make sure they go to my Uncle Al's house and sell them, because he's a really neat guy. Not that everybody else isn't a really neat guy, but now they have a mutual friend, and Uncle Al will show them around his boat shop.
Right.
And if I can do one more thing to encourage them to go, then I'll make 100 phone calls if I have to. Right? I don't mind doing that at all. And once that usually furthers the investment of them going. So it's amazing. And Carolyn, you probably experienced this too. I remember walking around Fogo Island when I was a teenager and thinking to myself, and the fishery was just coming to a close then, the cod fishery was just coming to a close, and looking around the average age of people, and also looking at all my friends who were my age, and they were all leaving. And I was greatly concerned of the economic future of the island, the sustainability. So what's happened in the last 4 years that people are going back and there's sustainable lifestyles, there's jobs, there's careers. People are raising kids there. They're leaving their jobs wherever they are to go back for these great opportunities. And you see the houses that were falling apart that now the Shorefast Foundation has given new life to. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be back, and I'm more than proud to talk to anybody about it.
What I'm finding, and so you know, I lived in Ontario for 25 years, and I'm just back in the province for 6. So
Wonderful.
Yeah. I didn't live in Toronto, but I do share your appreciation for the city. I think Toronto is one of the most. I mean, I've been to a few cities here and there, and it's one of the most wonderful cities I've ever experienced, because it's an incredibly clean and safe city, but it's still a huge city, and it has all of the benefits of, what cities have, which, as far as I'm concerned, are choices, opportunities.
That's right.
I actually last year, about a year ago, just under a year ago, I won a trip to Toronto for 2 nights to see Jim Cuddy at Massey Hall. It was the highlight of the year. Yeah, I won the trip. It was crazy. So we went on Valentine's Day and spent 2 days downtown Toronto in the theater, district, and
Sure.
at a beautiful hotel room. And those 2 days in downtown Toronto were, for me, solidified what I love about the city, because we didn't leave that little area. We didn't have a car, and I could, and I'm vegetarian, so I struggle a little bit to find food that I like and to have variety. And being here on the island, getting produce can be tricky, and so
Yes.
I was there, and the food was great, and the choices were there, and I could, I wasn't there long enough, but it was so good. And I went, this is what I like about cities, is that I have all this variety. Yeah, there's traffic, and there's, it crowds, and it all depends on what you prefer. But still, I do love to go to Toronto and just feel that energy. And I remember when I first moved to Ontario, I took the train. Believe it or not, it was 1988-ish, and took the train to Toronto, and got off at Union Station. Of course, I was from Change Islands, lived a little bit in St. John's, but even St. John's then is not like it is now, and came out at Union Station with these huge cement pillars into this fantastic, beautiful, amazing, incredible city, thinking, uh, cities are, to me, the ultimate representation of human creativity. We're always building them. We're always making them. They're never finished. You get 5 decades and you tear a building down and build a new one, or you completely renovate a block. They're never finished. And Toronto is a prime example of that. We complain about the construction, but that's us, just humans, building and rebuilding and adjusting and progressing. And that's where you see that in the city. So I love that. But, I do like my rural sit back, bogged down, wood stove going, waiting for the storm. I don't mind that too, So